Keys to the Shop, episode 217. Should you roast your own coffee? With Joe Marrocco. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. So thankful to have you along today for what I think is going to be a fantastic episode. So much great information from Joe Marrocco on roasting coffee, the good and the bad, and all the things you need to weigh in order to decide how, whether or not you're going to roast coffee for yourself. And even if you are a roaster, I think there's a lot in this conversation that you're going to really get some benefit from. So stay tuned there. Now, I would encourage you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. If you have not done so already, just hit subscribe wherever you get these podcasts. Also, don't forget, we are building a little community with Keys to the Shop. It's a private community on the Mighty Networks platform where we get together with other like-minded coffee professionals, owners and operators, etc., that want to encourage one another, share stories, tips, things like that, and just generally help each other succeed and thrive in our businesses. So there's a link in the show notes for you to click on if you want to join the Mighty Network of Keys to the Shop, and I would love to have you. If you don't want to click on that link, just email me, Chris@Keys to the Shop, and let me know that you want to join, and I'll send you an invitation. So can't wait to see you there in the community. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is an amazing specialty coffee equipment supplier. They work so hard to get the best equipment in for you and also match it with whatever specific need you have, whether that's to upgrade the equipment in your shop currently or to help outfit you for your second or third store. They have what you need there, whether that's brewers, grinders, or espresso machines, or even things like under-counter refrigeration and other traditional restaurant equipment. They cover the full spectrum there. Not only that, but when you go to their website, prima-coffee.com, you can find amazing free resources to help teach you about brewing coffee, making latte art, and cleaning equipment, really equipping you with the right equipment and the power and knowledge to use it is what Prima Coffee is all about. So that's why I love working with them, and I think you should work with them too. So if you're in the market for commercial equipment and you want the best from awesome people, then Prima Coffee is the place to go. Go to their website, check them out, prima-coffee.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. Of course, this is the line of plant-based performance beverages that are the gold standard, really, for plant-based beverages worldwide. And for good reason, because they do so much R&D on this. They lean heavily on the feedback from the barista community. They want these things to be created for and right alongside the baristas that use it day in and day out. So your customers get the best, guaranteed, whether that's almond, soy, coconut, rice, oat, whatever you choose from their line of beverages, you can be guaranteed that it's going to perform on the bar the way you always dreamed a plant-based beverage would. So being able to take the heat from steaming, latte art ready texture, and keeping a good flavor balance between the coffee and the milk, this is what it's all about. Your customers are going to love it. Get it in your store and try it out for yourself. Check them out over at pacificfoods.com. Follow the link in the show notes and see how the Pacific Barista Series can help elevate the plant-based offerings in your cafe. All right, well, today we are hashtag blessed to have Joe Marrocco back on the show. Now a frequent guest. I can say where he's a frequent guest. He's been on the show back in 2017 when he talked about transparency and origin knowledge in the cafe. That was a fantastic episode. He was also giving us some career advice on a shift break early on. I think that was sometime last year that we had him on, and now he's back. And he's back with us to talk about roasting coffee and whether it's the right move for you and your business. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this show, this is not only an episode for people who are on the fence about roasting their own coffee. I mean, mostly it is. But if you're roasting right now, there are some real gems in this conversation that I think are going to help equip you to do a fantastic job and elevate your game Joe is the right person to talk to about this. Highly sought after in the industry, one of the foremost authorities in roasting coffee in our space and specialty coffee. He's been in specialty since 2005. He's worked as a cafe manager, roaster, educator, a leader in the Barista Guild of America, as well as serving as chair of the Membership and Communications Committee and the Roasters Guild Executive Council. Joe spent a long time leading the charge in sales in education over at Café Imports in Minneapolis, as well as an educator with Mill City Roasters. He is now helping German-based greens importer List and Beisler establish a U.S. presence. So he is like the everything go-to guy for List and Beisler in the U.S. And Joe is just a very generous soul and well-spoken, and a lot of great insights into the world of coffee and especially roasting. A lot of material out there that Joe has given the community for free. And so today we are picking Joe's brain. We're talking about whether you should roast your own coffee or not. And I think in this time right now, we are looking around at the people who do roast their own coffee and realizing, you know, they have a little bit more resiliency in their business model. They have more places to go. When the chips are down, there's still the ability to sell whole bean online, and roasting operations are kind of the last thing to keep operating. And so it could be that you're thinking about, you know, I want to roast my own coffee. Maybe it's something good for my business. Well, we're going to dive into that today, talking about things like, do you really save money? We're talking about the logistical concerns, the positives and negatives, choosing roasting equipment, the right mindset to have as a roaster, following trends and being authentic to yourself. There's a ton of great content here. So anyway, I could go on and on. So without further ado, let's get right to the interview. Here now is my conversation about whether you should roast your own coffee with Joe Marrocco of List and Beisler. Well, Joe, thank you for joining us on Keys to the Shop. I'm excited to have you back on the show and to talk about this topic, a really important thing.
I'm super stoked to be here. Thank you for having me back.
So for those people who don't know, Joe has twice been on our show. You've had some career advice on the Shift Break series, which you're the second guest, or one of the first of the guests on the Shift Break series. And we had you on the show way back in the day as well. And now we're bringing you back to talk about roasting your own coffee, which I think most people in a retail setting are kind of eyeballing whether or not they could do better by themselves with their own roaster if they have to rely on their wholesale provider. And I know you've got a ton of opinions and experience with this because you've got such a great and long history working with retail and roasters. I wonder if, first of all, where are you right now? What is your role? What kind of things have you been able to see in your history in the coffee industry that has formed your opinions you're going to share with us today about roasting our own coffee?
Right now, I am sitting in Houston, Texas, in an office building with a few of my other colleagues from the company that I'm now working for, called List and Beisler. List and Beisler is a importing company located in Hamburg, Germany, and I am working to help them set up bricks and mortar here in the U.S. and to expand our clientele here in the U.S. and basically what kind of impact we can have. They've been doing business here in the U.S. for a very long time. We're the company that helped Peet's Coffee and Starbucks Coffee import their very first coffees way back in the 60s and 70s. And we've been working with Peet's Coffee ever since and are wanting to bring that kind of business savvy and those kinds of import models to smaller roasters and more, I guess you would say, specialized roasters that are looking for really high quality stuff, but that also need a lot of support in learning how to manage their finances and financial tools, things of that nature. So I'm taking my education background in green coffee / roaster company management to small companies all over the U.S. Super exciting time. It's a very busy time, so I'm doing a lot of traveling around right now, both meeting with roasters, but then also just trying to get this thing up off the ground. It's a blast. Before this, I was with Mill City Roasters. They're a roaster manufacturing company, and they're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I worked for them full time for a little over a year, but then also have helped them with a lot of their videos and educational material for, I guess, about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that was at Café Imports for a good long stint of time. And before that was a roaster and educator for Caldy's Coffee Roasting Company. I've literally helped, not figuratively, I've literally helped hundreds of roasters get their start, both during the periods where they were deciding how to buy green coffee, what green coffees to buy, and how to learn how to roast those green coffees from their very inception, to then even further in their decision-making process of helping them decide whether or not to buy a roaster and which roaster was the best fit for their company. So yeah, I've been in this kind of world for quite some time now.
One of the things I wanted to ask about your experience working with all of those people who are looking to buy roasters and trying to become roasters. I mean, how many of these folks are going to just be roasters, or how many of them are retailers that say, you know what, it's about time that we roast our own coffee? About what percentage would you say is the latter?
I would say that the vast majority of roasters that I have helped start are companies that are coming online just as a roaster first, because the amount of capital that it takes to start a cafe is quite significant. And so usually they are trying to be entrepreneurial and trying to start at that lowest barrier of entry, and that is starting as a roaster. A lot of them will buy a smaller machine, put it in a garage or a shed or something like that, and begin very small and build that wholesale business or that direct bean to consumer business. That's the B2C.
Mm-hmm. Right.
bean to consumer.
Oh.
And then they will sometimes start some kind of a retail after that. Usually it's going to be more of like a pour over station at a farmer's market, or get a little kiosk somewhere, something of that nature. The companies that are cafes that decide to roast, there are obviously a lot of them, but I would say it's maybe 10 to 25%, somewhere in that range. Because basically you have, in order to do that, generally you have to have been running a cafe for quite some time. And that cafe has to be successful enough to where the business owner's mind wanders to a conclusion of, I want to add a whole bunch more complication to my life. This cafe is running great. Let's add some more business.
Nice.
So then they move down that path. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does seem like a entrepreneurial itch that everybody has, to sort of add something else because there's a bit of boredom. I don't say boredom, but a new challenge. It doesn't seem like a great reason to do something. And I bet there's a lot of people that wish they hadn't gone down that road because of that. And I've told people this before in consulting when they ask me about, keys to the shop consulting, or even about things that we talk about on this show. Like, so much of this has to do with helping you to not do things, in a sense. Like, there are a lot of ideas in the industry. You're connected to too many ideas to actually execute. So you've got to select them pretty well. It seems like people just get themselves in trouble when they try to do everything that seems good, or they hype themselves up with not a lot of critical reasoning skill behind that.
Yep.
So it's like trying to convince somebody that, no, you shouldn't open a cafe, at least not yet. And in this case, I think maybe a good place to start would be to ask, what are some reasons why you would say, hey, you shouldn't roast your own coffee? Not look at this, look at the financials, look at the situation you're in with your employees. Like, there's a lot of reasons, I bet, behind that idea of saying you're not ready to roast your own coffee. What would you say those are?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it simple and then flush out each point here. But one of the reasons is it's hard. roasting coffee seems like it's going to be easy, and it can be easy to roast coffee. Okay. It's very hard to roast coffee extremely well, extremely consistently, and to have that brand synergy. I kind of hate that word, but it truly is between your roasted coffee and your cafes. It's really hard to manage two businesses. And when you start a coffee roasting branch of your retail business, it is truly like stepping up to a second business overall. Um, it's not to say that it's impossible. It's kind of like having a second child. It is a wonderful thing to have once you have a second child, but it almost begins to exponentially add to your overall busyness. There are so many things to manage on a coffee roasting side of things that you just don't think about until you're already deeply involved in the roasting process. From packaging to storage to um, maintaining the flow of green coffee in and roasted coffee out. Just buying green coffee and making sure that you have the right coffees, making sure that that inventory is rotating in an appropriate way for your liquidity for your company. That alone is a huge challenge and takes a lot of space. And there are a lot of extra costs and a lot of extra time involved, whether that's from cupping or just from managing a spreadsheet on what coffees are coming in and what coffees you have to repurchase. All of those things take a lot of time. And all of those things are additional mental space capsules that you have to maintain in your mind. And as a business owner, a lot of times, um, you know, much better than I do, you stay awake at night thinking about all of those loose ends and all of the possibilities of things that can go wrong. And so adding to that mixture can be a really big challenge.
It seems like you would have to have your current business pretty much locked down, or at least chugging along pretty well or being self-sufficient, I'd say, if anything could be self-sufficient, but healthy enough to be able to take you away from the operations and have it not fall apart. The thought process behind starting to roast your own coffee for a lot of people is that they're going to save money. That ultimately seems like what I hear the most of, we're paying this much for our wholesale coffee. If we just roasted our own, we'd save this. Is that a good reason? Is that a good train of thought? It seems like it could be both good and bad depending on how you approach it.
I think that in the US, especially, I can speak to the US, but probably in most developing worlds or developed world, there is this mentality that success for your business is based on financial gain, and that if you can do all of the things that save the most money and that then turn the highest profit, then you'll have a really successful business, quote unquote. But the truth is, success is measured in a lot of different ways. And I think that the success of having a business that doesn't keep you up at night and that brings you joy is probably far more valuable than the success of having more liquidity or more equity or more money moving in the door every day. So when making the decision of whether or not to move forward with a business venture, it's really important to understand how that connects to you as an individual and how that's going to benefit your personal health and your personal sense of joy. And if that ownership of that is going to really be something that you thrive off of. So there is, and to get to the, I guess, brass tacks of that question, it is the truth that a pound of green coffee costs a whole lot less than a pound of roasted coffee. But the realities of that is that pound of roasted coffee costs a lot more because of all of the inputs involved between the point of it being green and the point of it being a packaged roasted product on a shelf. All of that that work, the packaging, the processing, all of those steps involved that inflate that price so much are now going to be owned basically by the company that decides to roast. And so those costs are also incurred, but also the headache behind each of those costs, or the actual labor involved and choices involved behind each of those costs, are also incurred. So when we talk about cost benefit, costs are more than just financial. Costs are also time. I think time is probably the most valuable of the commodities that we work with. And the time that it takes to take green coffee to a final product is quite substantial. Whereas if you have a roasting partner that you can just buy that coffee from, all of that time and headache is then on them, and you can monetize that time in a lot of other ways, if the other ways bring you more joy than what owning that coffee roasting company would.
Yeah, interesting, because there's you have to force yourself to, what I hear you saying is you force yourself to forecast what it's going to be like, instead of simply having this be a linear thing like, oh, cheaper, I'll do that, and inherit a lot of headaches. And I think a lot of people open coffee shops that way too. Let alone, start to roast their own coffee. They say, well, I've got this retirement money, or I got whatever, and I'm going to do this because I think it's going to be an awesome thing. We get hyped up on a lot of Gary V. No hate to Gary V, but there's a lot of things that we use to convince ourselves that our way is right without like diving deeper. To your point about what keeps you up at night, a lot of people are kept up at night just by the cash flow. And so that is kind of a temptation to say, well, what's keeping me up at night is the fact that I'm paying so much for coffee. So I think I'd sleep better if I did roast my own coffee. Let's say that's their Tylenol PM. Like, I'm going to roast my own coffee. That feels good. So now, realistically, when we put all those inputs in, when you hire the people, get the roaster, get packaging, marketing, all that stuff, what's the turnaround for profitability for most people that start roasting their own coffee in a, like, just say a 1 or 2 location retail business?
Yeah, usually with a successful company, you're looking at about a 10-ish% profit overall. When it comes to a coffee roasting company, it's going to be similar numbers to coffee retail. And it really depends on how you manage and run that business. Now, if you own coffee retail and wholesale, if you do it well, you can be more profitable than if you own just one or the other. And there are some definite benefits to roasting your own coffee. One of the major benefits being that you own your own brand, from the roasted coffee through to the brewed beverage. And so whenever somebody looks on your shelf and they see your coffee brand, it doesn't convolute the company's overall brand. A lot of times, if you look on a shelf and see another coffee roasting company's brand, but you're branded as, X Cafe, but there's Y Coffee, it can add a little bit of confusion. That's very quickly clarified. Most people understand that you're probably using somebody else's coffee, so it's not like a negative if you have somebody else's roasted coffee on the shelf. But that brand equity is something that is certainly of value and grows if you do your own roasting. Doing your own roasting can also lead to you having a little bit more expertise in the product overall, a lot more control over the specific flavor experience that your clients are going to have, because you have gone from the selection process of deciding which green coffee to buy, which there's generally a lot larger opportunity for selection on the green side than there is on the roasted side. And then you get to choose how to present that coffee as a roasted product. So how light, how medium, how dark, or how certain flavors are accentuated, and then tying all of that into your overall brand. Obviously, this can also be done with a roaster partner. If you have a good relationship with the roaster partner, you're probably already partnering with a roasting company that basically is roasting coffee to your desired flavor profiles anyway. So again, it's kind of like the decision of whether or not you want to own all of that responsibility and whether that brings you a lot of joy, that process brings you joy, and it's going to connect a lot more with your brand, or if that's just too much.
So I guess depending on, the size of your business, you can expect to see some profit from this, maybe year or two from the time you start kind of launching it. I guess it would really depend on your expertise beforehand. Like if you were paying attention to what your roaster is doing and really educating yourself, I suppose it would cut down on the time that you go from idea to profitability.
Yeah, there are a lot of driving factors here, and I usually see kind of two different major scenarios. One scenario is starting with a very small machine in a very small space, and the other, or you could say at a lower barrier of entry with less of a business loan, maybe bootstrapping that business on your own. Or on the other side, having a large investment, getting into a full scale roasting operation with a larger machine. Now, the benefit of the smaller machine is you have a whole lot less to pay off, and you can begin to generate income that would pay off that roaster, that would allow you to buy the next size up roaster and basically keep more cash liquid and less cash tied up in loans. The negative of that side is that your time is also tied up, and that time is of value. So you kind of want to find a sweet spot where you're buying a machine that allows you the capacity that you need to start generating actual money, but that's not so big that it ties up all of your money. On the other side, if you have business loans or you have the ability to buy a larger machine in an actual space with storage and the whole facility, the whole 9 yards, then you can hit the ground running pretty quickly and pump out some high volumes, and those volumes can begin to pay off that loan. The problem with that is that you have to have customers in order for that volume to be sold. And so if you have a large roasting machine in a large building, and by large I mean even like a 10-kilo machine, that's a pretty big machine for a new company starting out. That is a huge chunk of cash that now you owe on and you're paying interest on. And the longer that takes for you to pay off, the less profitable you're going to be. And so if you don't have the business already in place to run that machine at a capacity that at least pays that loan off and then some, then you're going into debt basically every day that roaster is under your ownership. And that is a huge drag on the beginning of your business. One of the most important things that you can have as a young business or a startup, which whether you've had a cafe for 20 years or 2 years, if you're starting to roast, you are starting a new company. One of the most important things you need is cash. And so if your cash is all tied up, then you don't have the power in your business or the engine in your business to drive that business forward very well. And all of your decisions are going to be kind of based on that fear or inability to pay. So your marketing's not going to be as good. Your quality is not going to be as good. Your staff are not going to be paid as well, so they're not going to be as happy. All of these things start to fall apart. So it's really important for you to know that you have the business in place for the machine that you need. And, I'm always game to talk to people about this because it's such an important decision to make right from the beginning. And there are some mathematical equations that you can throw at this. How many pounds per hour can I produce on this machine? How many pounds per week do I need to produce? So how many hours per week is it going to take me to roast this coffee in order for me to fulfill the need that I have now? And what are my 3-year projections for growth? And will this machine get me through the first 3 years of my business? Or am I 1 year from now going to have to buy another machine? And is that in my business plan? So these are really good questions to ask whenever you start thinking about going down this path. I will add, I know I'm rambling a bit, apologize, but I will add that a coffee roaster does hold its value. So even though, um, you know, somebody may get into the roasting business and then at the end of the day be like, this is the worst decision I've ever made. It's not the end of the world, because roasters are pretty easily resold for the most part, unless you have something really weird and obscure, or unless you bought a really poorly manufactured machine. Most roasters you can sell almost for the same amount that you bought them for. So there's an exit plan if all else fails.
That's great. That's a little comforting to know. Not necessarily the
Mhm.
same with espresso machines, but
No, not at all.
you were talking as you're talking. I'm thinking, just replace roaster with coffee house, and it's the same thing. You're projecting your
Hmm.
profitability. You're putting in all of those inputs to decide what you need to do. Like, do I need a one group? Do I need a two group? Like, what if you grow and you've just got that little, Oscar machine that you got from your home, and you thought that was going to be enough because it was cheap, and it doesn't pay to be cheap in the beginning, just like you're saying. It's
Hmm.
very much tying your hands, because your idea needs cash to actually get into people's view. There's so much to look at. There's so many brands of roasters
Hmm.
and coffee shops. To make a splash, it really means this is what I hear you saying. Like, you need to have a significant amount of money to be seen and heard as a brand in order to build momentum in the beginning, or else it seems like you're going to be buried because nothing else is stopping.
Yeah, and a lot of that momentum can be in the form of just pure relationships. I think that a lot of times people jump into the game thinking, well, I've got an internet background. I know how to market online, and I'll just market this online and it'll take off. And they don't know anybody. Whereas other people have a huge social network of actual, real, live, three-dimensional people in their lives, where if they're starting a roasting brand, it does just take off. That, I think, is one of the benefits of having retail before starting wholesale, is because you already have a crowd of people who are walking into a business that you own every single day and already trust you with coffee decisions. And so building that business off of an existing business already lends that inertia to your new project. So there is some benefit to already having done the retail route, but that retail route is so, involving, as you very well know. You mentioned roaster brands. I think that that's another thing that we get very, um, I would say, devoted to, or almost like, um, it's almost like a following for some kind of religion or something like that. We
Say it.
get super
Say it.
devoted
It's a
to
cult.
specific. It is. It can be, where you like have a group of people online that you're connected with, or a group of people in the coffee industry that you're connected with that have very strong opinions. And just because that person has an opinion about a thing, then it's very easy to jump on board with just buying that thing, as opposed to really doing the deeper understanding of how things work and why, and making a wise decision over a brand decision. And there are some coffee roaster brands out there that frankly are awful, but that are very popular. And I get to hear it from the side of the roaster who is frustrated and stymied. And that is, they basically will feel like their wings are clipped because they don't have the control that they need over the product. And they know that a coffee has more to offer, but their machine is just inhibiting their ability to get that flavor out of the coffee or get a repeatable product. There's also that big divide between roasting on an automated system or roasting on a manual system. And I have strong opinions about that as well. And whenever you're initially buying that machine, there are so many business reasons thrown out there as to why you should do manual or why you should do automated. And at the end of the day, usually it's somebody making that decision that is making the decision to roast based on business decisions. And so they'll try to choose the path of least resistance, or try to choose the thing that on paper looks much more desirable, which is generally automation. And the vast majority of automation out there is awful. It's horrible, and it doesn't work. It's not real. It doesn't really um, affect the coffee in a repeatable, controllable manner. No matter what an engineer will tell you about it, it's just not the case. And there are a couple of machines out there that are fully automated that absolutely rock. Um, but they rock for, in my opinion, they rock for very specific things. A manual machine, or a machine that you can do both manual and automated roasting on, is going to give you a lot more control over the flavor. So if roasting is something that you really do want to get into, listener, if you are really um, thinking this is the path for me, I really enjoy that part of business, and it's not about the money. I want to do this because it brings me joy. I want to do this because I think it's really good for my company, not just because it's more equity, but because it's just, all of the good reasons are in your favor and you're just going to go for it. Um, Make those decisions on what machine that you're going to buy within that same vein. Because if you buy a machine that doesn't have a soul and that takes you out of the process of delivering the flavor control that you want to, you're going to, at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of frustration, a whole lot of frustration, because you got into this to create something of beauty, and now you don't have the control to do that, and now you're indebted to this machine, and it ends up not just stealing your joy, but it replaces your joy with a lot of anger and frustration, and that's just not healthy.
Oh, no, doesn't sound healthy. That's really interesting. And it seems like fear would be one of the reasons why, not always, but just the fear of the unknown and the promise of ease and the promise of, taking over and saying, no, you can still have have your cake and eat it too, and that type of sense. But the same, I guess, could be said for espresso machines and everything else. Like, there's a sense in which you're developing your calling card is your brand's, like the flavor profiles and your expertise and the repeatability and the ability to make adjustments on the fly, and to be a real person. We were talking about relationships earlier, as you were discussing the advantage of retail, as already existing retail space could add so much value to a roasting operation. And that's only true because there's that human touch. And I think we do tend to be a little bit more down on the human touch lately because we're so good at inventing machines. But we seem to always circle back around to this conversation about the touch, the hand involved in the process. And so I guess I have two questions, really. One is, would it be more advantageous for somebody who is not even, let's say they're not even started a coffee business yet, to start a retail store first and then start roasting as a grand plan, or just start it all at the same time? And a follow-up to that would be, once you've started as a roaster, and I imagine anyone who started as a roaster is thinking, we're going to be great. How do they get it onto Joe's list of terrible roasters? Like, how does that happen?
Oh, man. I'll answer the first question first, and then you might have to remind me of the second one.
Yeah, sorry to spring those both on you, but super interested.
No, I think that if you are getting into the business of coffee and you're deciding between wholesale or retail, that it should really start with, what do you love? What brings you joy? And this is not a new concept, but it seems to be very quickly lost when you get into the weeds of deciding what is going to bring your company equity, or what is going to make the most money. What makes the most money is generally not the most important thing to focus on. What brings you joy is the most important thing, because out of your joy will spring all of the connections and the beauty that you're going to be relying upon. The beauty being what you sell, and the connections being who you sell to. So if you are just an angry person who's always frustrated all the time, then what your business creates is not going to be aesthetic to the point that a lot of people are going to want to connect with it. And so your sales are going to go down. But if you are enjoying what you do and have a passion for it, people will connect to that passion. And I believe that it transfers through your product. That's maybe a little mysticism. But I believe that if I am creating a piece of art, that whatever emotions I have during creation of that piece of art are going to be expressed through that artistic medium. And coffee is that, whether it's from the retail side or the wholesale side. And so if you are more inclined to be that roaster, if you're more of like if you prefer to work on a motorcycle rather than to cook a dinner, then maybe roasting is a better avenue for you to go down. If you're more into like the culinary side and the front of house and helping people feel comfortable and taken care of, then maybe retail is a better avenue to go down. What I would say as a maybe a axiom of truth is it's probably not wise to start both at the same time, because that's so much to do. And there are tools and outlets for you. If you're starting wholesale, you can very quickly, decide whether or not that's right for you by just asking around and seeing where coffee is in your community. And if there are a lot of opportunities for you to sell coffee, then you automatically have an audience and you can just start roasting and then plug your coffee into that audience and take off until you have enough acumen on that one thing that you're proficient and it's running smooth. And then you can make the decision to start the second business. Same thing with retail. If you start that retail, there's so much involved in that alone that starting two businesses at the same time is just not going to, I don't think that it's a very wise thing. I look at it, I mean, if you think about a coffee shop is really also a pastry shop. It's also a shop for whatever t-shirts and other things you're selling. It's also more than anything a milk shop. And you don't have people saying, I'm going to start a dairy in a coffee shop because I want to control the process. I want to control the product. I want to save money on my milk. The thought of starting a dairy farm is absurd, because it's such a big thing. There's so much involved in that. There are so many processes involved. Obviously, a roastery is not quite the same as a dairy farm. It doesn't have that much involved, but it's still a whole nother thing that's controlling only one of the many products that you sell. And I mean, it would be the same as saying I'm going to start an espresso machine manufacturing company because I want to control the process or whatever. I'm going to start a bakery or whatever the case may be. So focusing on the one thing that is the initial spark to what it was that gave you the desire to start that company to begin with is super important. When you start convoluting that with all of the other things that come from the idea of I need to make more money or I want to make more money or how is this more profitable, then that's when things start to get dragged.
Well said. So let's say
go
now to bring it back into the second question, which is if we're at the end of this talk here and say, okay, well, check, I'm good to go, going to start a roastery. How do we, what's the path to the dark side? Who feeds us after midnight to turn us into bad roasters, in your opinion? Because you mentioned that earlier, and I was really curious. I'm sure all of us start with great intentions, but then something happens, and here we are.
Yeah, I think we could talk about a lot of different things that would be categorically a bad roaster. The first thing that comes to mind is just the machine itself. What is bad about a roaster? And when making that decision, it's important to think about the volume of the machine you have. How quickly can you turn from a batch to the next batch? What is your time in between batches look like? How does it load? Mechanically, how is it built? Is it sturdy? Is it going to break? If it's going to break, the most important thing is who is going to help me service it. The vast majority of manufacturers out there are crappy when it comes to customer service, and customer service is vitally important to your business, no matter what piece of equipment you buy. And do I have control? Do I have control over the parameters that I want to control? The more control you have over your machine, the more control you have over your coffee's quality and the flavor involved in that coffee. And if there's only one thing you can control, that doesn't give you a lot of options. If there are 5 things you can control, that gives you a ton of options. But then you have to have the education and know how to follow through and understand those things so you control those things well. So a human being who is a bad roaster is like, the first thing is just maybe I would say lazy. If I see a roaster who's just like on their phone the whole time, or playing games, or walking away, or doesn't care at all about the product, that's a bad roaster. It's bad because it's bad for the product, but it's also bad because it's super dangerous. And roasting is a pretty involved sport and requires a attention span that I don't possess very well myself. And that ability to stay focused and do a repeated task over and over with exacting precision. And that would be a very good roaster. Another bad roaster is maybe somebody who just lacks skill in general to connect the dots between how to maintain the machine, what the green coffee had in it to begin with, so like ingredient knowledge, and then how to associate the flavors that they're getting on a cupping table or through tasting processes back to the process of roasting and to the green coffee itself. That is something that is very easily solved through training, time, and effort. So I would say that bad roaster is maybe just in need of a little training and could be a good little roaster very soon. But the laziness part, that's the real kicker for me. And a lot of times, if somebody is a business owner who also has to focus on roasting and they have a ton of other tasks on their plate, then they're a distracted roaster. And a distracted roaster is almost worse than a lazy roaster because they're pulled in all these different directions and don't have the ability to focus on it.
Yeah, and you can taste that in the end product. And I imagine if your wholesale clients are the recipients of that work, and you said earlier that it might be mystical to say this, but I totally, agree with you that there's something that you can experience, feel, and ultimately taste in the product that shows the intention and work behind it. And I'm sure that you could pick out those roasters and say, yeah, this is just always inconsistent, or they're dropping the ball in this way and that way, or maybe they just had a bad week, but these bad weeks seem to be stacking up. And you might just, as a roaster, start to ask for more grace than is really professionally acceptable at that point. Like everyone makes mistakes. But I guess there's a point where it becomes systemically a problem for you. And that's either how you lose business, or I guess how people become disgruntled and start to think about roasting their own instead of using your roasted coffee.
Yep, it's true. And I think another big trap out there for roasters is in the online space. There are so many voices that focus on things that just don't matter or that don't add up scientifically, and that are propagated by strong personalities that don't really understand physics and don't really understand scientific method and other things like that. And so a lot of people will follow the cult, as you put it earlier. Whatever everybody else is doing, that's what I'm going to do. And so my curve needs to look a certain way, the curve being the roast profile of temperature over time that you kind of see on your computer screen as you're roasting. And they will just try to replicate whatever they're told because they don't have their own personal training or experience to the point where they feel confident in their process. And they're not following the old, the age-old advice of just do what tastes good, and taste your product and make adjustments to make your product taste better. That is a very simple way of roasting, but at the end of the day, sometimes that causes somebody's curve to look super weird compared to what everybody else online is saying should be the case. And so if a roaster is just doing what everybody else is doing, two things happen. One, they're never going to have their coffee taste the way that they want it to taste, because their machine is different, their coffee is different. And so if they're adhering to something somebody else is saying for a different coffee and a different machine, it's going to automatically make their coffee taste out of control. And two, if they have the same machine and same coffee and they're roasting the same curve, it's going to make their coffee taste completely like the other person's. And so that there's no artistic expression or individuality or deviation from what everybody else is doing. And we might as well just get a Starbucks franchise at that point and say, we're just going to have everything taste homogenized to every other shop that's like mine. I think the goal of any retailer, any wholesaler, should be at some point to stand out from the crowd and have your own identity, so that people, when they choose you, are choosing something that's special and unique, so that they come back to you. If we just line up and all have the same, design in our cafe, the same espresso machine, the same espresso that we're pulling, and everything is the same in every shop, then we become nothing more than a disenfranchised franchise.
Nice. Look at that. Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of FOMO that people have because a lot of our lives are lived online, and we're meant to both discover for ourselves. And it's not bad. We're listening to a podcast right now, or trying to learn from an outside source. But your experience also is so valuable, and increasingly it's easy to kind of throw away your experience and try to look cool or be cool, even down to the farm level where people are they plant so many geisha trees that are so low yield and fussy and not really making the farms any money, but they see they're winning competitions, and it's not really healthy for them to do that. That's a huge issue all the way down to all the way upstream in the value stream.
It's so true. And the benefit of a trend is that you can maybe get some loft or some inertia from that trend in the beginning. But when that trend goes away, then all of that inertia crashes. And if you have built a business around a trend, that crash will include that business as well. So there's nothing more valuable than you being authentic to yourself and doing what brings you joy, because those two things will give birth to something of value that people will connect with, and it won't just simply be a trend, it'll have sticking power. Those businesses, those restaurants that you go to that have been around for 25, 35 years, that are always delicious, that are always amazing, and that you leave feeling as though your soul is better for having been there.
Yeah.
That takes an authentic business owner who's doing things out of their own personal sense of joy. And there's nobody that can recreate that. You cannot recreate something that is authentic. You can only try to replicate it. Most trends are built on replicating something, some experience that somebody had that at its root was authentic. So there's usually a starting point of something good and beautiful, but then as it just gets replicated and replicated, it becomes more and more plastic and gross.
Yeah, certainly. I've certainly experienced that. And as we wrap up here, I wonder, and I feel like what you just said is perfect, but I wonder if there's anything else that you want to add to this conversation as a way to wrap us up and give us some final advice as we make the decision to start roasting our own coffee and get on this train and try to make it work and try to be authentic and in a world where it's increasingly easy to not be.
Yeah, I think that if you have a relationship right now, let's say you're a retail company and you have a relationship with your wholesale roaster right now that is really strong, and that wholesale roaster is super supportive, their quality is great, they have educational opportunities. All of the things in place are really built to sustain your business. Then it may be the case that starting a roasting program is just hubris. It may just be something that you want to do because you just want to do it. And that may not be a good decision. There are opportunities, though, for you to, I have seen a lot of companies start roasting where they only roast a portion of their coffees, but they still maintain their relationship with their roaster, with the wholesale provider that they're working with. So in the event that roasting still would bring you that joy, but you are also very connected with a partner, you can have your cake and eat it too if you do that delicately and reassure your roasting partner that you're only doing it for a part of your business, because it can ruffle feathers when you start to roast. And you will be shocked when you do step out into that abyss of roasting your own coffee and you step away from that relationship that has been so supportive, how much you got out of that relationship. We always, we don't really clearly see things until they're gone sometimes. So don't throw away something that is bringing your business a ton of value right now. Don't be hasty in that decision.
Joe, this has really been a fantastic conversation, and I so appreciate you being open and sharing all of this on the show. How can we stay in touch with you and what you're doing at List and Beisler, and just kind of follow up from here?
Yeah, great. On social media, I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Roaster Joe. So you can follow me over there. I get tons of messages there. If I'm slow to respond to your messages, I try to kind of keep social media at a minimum in my life as much as I can, and I get bombarded a lot of times with a lot of questions. So just know that I will get to your question. It may just take a little bit. You can also email me at joe.marrocco, that's MARROCCO, at list dash Beisler, that's BEISLER .US. I know it's kind of a mouthful, but
and we'll have it in the show notes for sure.
If you can keep it together, you've earned my reply. And then List and Beisler, we also have Instagram, so it's just List Beisler. And then if you want to follow our US side, it's at List Beisler USA.
Awesome.
We'd love to see you over there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much. You're awesome. And again, super excited to welcome you back to the show after 2 years or so, I think. But
wow.
Again,
well,
fantastic.
Thanks for having me, Chris. You're awesome as well.
Okay, so I really appreciate this conversation, not just because we covered such a wide variety of concepts and points within the roasting space, because in that there's this common thread of approaching it with the simplicity of, does it taste good? Does it bring me joy? And I love how Joe, with all of his experience and knowledge and expertise, is still able to communicate and boil it down to the essence of what it means to take on something like the craft of roasting. It might be no different than taking on any particular type of craft, like maybe just starting a cafe, for example. The same mindset could be applied to that. Does it bring you joy? In how when you're taking on a project like roasting, it should be with the idea that you want to do it authentically and always being in touch with kind of the why behind the what. And so I'm really thankful Joe not only broke down the details to help us weigh the data and the just practical points of doing this, but also helped us to get grounded and say, well, why do you want to do this in the first place? And now at the end of this conversation, I think we're better equipped to make that decision. Thank you so much, Joe, for being a voice of reason, a voice of knowledge, and one that helps us be grounded as we make decisions that are going to impact our business. Now, I'll have links in the show notes where you can follow Joe on Twitter and Instagram, also his email over at List and Beisler. And I want to encourage you also, this week, Joe is going to be a guest again on our Shift Break episode. He's going to be talking about building an accessible coffee menu that includes how you do that in how you speak about coffee to your guests, but also how you build a roasted coffee menu as a roaster that will really serve your customers well. As we enter into the future of retail, we need to be thinking about accessibility, celebrating a wider variety of coffees, and designing our menus to really serve our guests well. This short conversation between Joe and I is going to help you in your pursuit of building a great and accessible coffee menu for your business. So don't miss that this week on Thursday. Now, if you want to get in contact with me for anything, you can do so by emailing me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's my email. And you can ask questions, give me feedback, make suggestions, things like that. I really love hearing from listeners to the show. Are there things that you want to hear from the show that you haven't heard, especially during this crisis? I want to know, because I want this show to be a great resource in the midst of what everyone is going through in the audience here. Hopefully the COVID-19 focus series has been helpful to that end. You can also email me if you're interested in working with Keys to the Shop consulting or training. If you're interested in working with me over the phone, we offer coaching over the phone, monthly phone calls twice a month or once a month at a very deeply discounted rate right now, just during this time of crisis to make that more accessible to you. Normally, it's a really good price, but now it's even better. So with all of my clients in consultation, phone calls are a part of it, and there's so much clarity gained just from these conversations. Great business decisions are made. We work through solutions to problems and set up plans for the future. So maybe you and I can have those conversations as well. If you're interested in that, you want to sign up and see if it's right for you, email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, I thank you for joining me on another episode here at Keys to the Shop. Thank you so much for being listeners. Remember to share these episodes with a friend. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.